1919, a garage in Columbus, Indiana. Clessie Cummins, working as a chauffeur for a wealthy banker, is building something his employer thinks will never work, a diesel engine light enough for a truck. Rudolf Diesel's compression ignition engine has been around since 1897, powering ships and stationary equipment. But everyone knows diesel is too heavy, too slow, too rough for highway use. Clessie doesn't care what everyone knows. He's convinced that diesel's fuel efficiency, nearly double that of gasoline, will eventually matter more than its weight. What he doesn't know yet is that his garage experiment will spark a 100-year war with the most powerful corporation on Earth, a rivalry that will split American truckers into two tribes as loyal and stubborn as any in industrial history. Jim, this is the story of Cummins versus Detroit Diesel. Two companies, two philosophies, and the battle that powered every truck in America. The diesel engine Clessie Cummins, built in 1919, weighed 1,200 pounds and produced 12 horsepower. By comparison, a contemporary gasoline engine producing the same power weighed maybe 300 pounds. The weight-to-power ratio was terrible. The engine ran rough, shook violently, and required a massive flywheel just to maintain consistent rotation. But it burned kerosene, which cost half as much as gasoline and delivered significantly more miles per gallon. Clessie saw the future in that efficiency. He convinced his employer, William Glanton Irwin, to fund development. The Cummins Engine Company incorporated in 1919 with Irwin's money and Clessie's engineering genius. They had no customers, no production capacity, and no proof that anyone would want what they were selling. General Motors saw diesel differently. GM didn't care about diesel until 1930, when they realized railroad companies were buying diesel-electric locomotives because fuel costs were destroying their profits during the Depression. GM didn't innovate, they acquired. In 1930, GM purchased Winton Engine Company and Electro-Motive Corporation, two diesel manufacturers. By 1938, they consolidated diesel operations into a new division, Detroit Diesel Engine Division. GM brought industrial-scale manufacturing, unlimited capital, and the weight of the world's largest automaker to the diesel engine business. When Detroit Diesel entered trucking in the 1940s, they weren't a garage startup hoping for customers. And they were a division of General Motors with captive customers, GM's own truck brands. The fundamental difference between Cummins and Detroit Diesel was philosophical. Cummins built four-stroke cycle engines, the same basic design as automobile engines: intake stroke, compression stroke, power stroke, exhaust stroke, 4 movements of the piston per complete cycle. Detroit Diesel built two-stroke cycle engines. Every downward movement of the piston was a power stroke. This meant a Detroit Diesel engine produced power twice as often as a Cummins of the same displacement. The two-stroke design required a Roots-type supercharger, a blower that forced air into the cylinders since the engine couldn't naturally aspirate enough air with such short intake timing. The supercharger made Detroit Diesels distinctive. They whined, they howled, and they screamed. The Detroit Diesel Series 71, introduced in 1938 and refined through the 1950s, became legendary not for efficiency but for sound. The designation 71 referred to the displacement per cylinder, 71 cubic inches. A 671 engine had 6 cylinders and 426 cubic inches of total displacement. An 871 pushed that to 568 cubic inches. The supercharger drove constantly, spinning it up to 3 times engine speed, creating a rising and falling mechanical wail that changed pitch with engine speed. At idle, it was a steady whistle. Under load, it became a howl. At full throttle, it screamed. Truckers called it the Screaming Jimmy. The nickname came from GMC, General Motors Corporation, which truckers shortened to Jimmy. A 671 Detroit Diesel in a GMC truck was a Screaming Jimmy, and that sound became the voice of American trucking in the post-war boom. The interstate highway system, authorized in 1956, created the modern trucking industry. Suddenly, long-haul routes that took days on 2-lane roads could be run overnight on divided highways. Freight tonnage exploded. By 1960, trucks were moving 20% of all freight in America. By 1970, that number reached 40%. The demand for reliable, powerful engines that could run 100,000 miles per year became critical. Detroit Diesel and Cummins fought for every order. Drivers who ran Screaming Jimmies described the sound as alive. The supercharger didn't just whine, it sang. Accelerate through the gears, and the pitch would climb, a mechanical crescendo that announced your presence a mile before you arrived. The exhaust note was sharp, almost metallic, distinct from the deeper rumble of 4-stroke diesels, and the 2-stroke design meant power delivery was instant. Touch the throttle, and the engine responded without the lag characteristic of naturally aspirated 4-stroke engines. Detroit Diesels felt eager, responsive, almost athletic, despite weighing over 1,500 pounds. They weren't the most efficient engines. They required oil changes every 5,000 miles compared to Cummins' 10,000-mile intervals. They consumed more fuel. But they had character. You didn't operate a Detroit diesel. You partnered with it. Cummins fought back with engineering. In 1952, Cummins introduced the NH series, naturally aspirated, to heavy-duty four-stroke diesels designed specifically for highway trucks. The NH220 produced 220 horsepower, competitive with Detroit's offerings but with significantly better fuel economy. Cummins engines ran quieter, smoother, and required less maintenance between overhauls. The four-stroke design was mechanically simpler, no supercharger to maintain, no complex two-stroke timing to manage. Cummins built a reputation for durability. Operators reported NH engines running 500,000 miles before major overhauls. That kind of longevity mattered to owner-operators who paid for their own repairs. But loyalty isn't built on spreadsheets. Detroit Diesel had the sound, the GM dealer network, and factory integration with GMC and later Chevrolet medium-duty trucks. Cummins was an independent. They sold engines to anyone who would buy. Peterbilt, Kenworth, Freightliner, Mack, International, even some GMC trucks ran Cummins power. This independence created flexibility, but also vulnerability. Detroit Diesel could dictate terms to GM's truck divisions. Cummins had to negotiate with every manufacturer individually. The competition intensified through the 1960s and into the 1970s, with both companies pushing horsepower higher and fuel economy slightly better while maintaining their fundamental design philosophies. Then came the Cummins Big Cam. Introduced in 1976, the NTC 400 Big Cam became the engine every trucker wanted. The name came from the oversized camshaft that controlled valve timing. Bigger cam meant longer valve duration, which meant more air into the cylinders, which meant more power. The NTC 400 produced 400 horsepower from 855 cubic inches, roughly 14 liters. And that was massive power for the era. Peak torque reached 1,450 pound-feet at just 1,200 RPM. You could lug a big cam down to 1,000 RPM, pulling a grade, and it would just grunt and keep pulling. The torquey curve was flat and wide, usable power across the entire operating range. More importantly, the big cam was nearly indestructible. The cast iron block featured Siamese cylinders with minimal spacing between bores, maximizing structural rigidity. The forged steel crankshaft rode on 7 main bearings, each one massive and over-engineered. Roller tappets reduced friction and wear on the camshaft. The gear-driven fuel pump and mechanical injection system had no electronics to fail. Everything was steel, iron, and precision machining. And owner-operators routinely ran big cams over 1 million miles with nothing more than regular oil changes and valve adjustments. Stories circulated of big cams running with a cracked block, leaking head gaskets, or worn rings, and still making their deliveries. The engine had a reputation for being bulletproof, or for taking abuse that would destroy any other diesel, for just refusing to die. Truckers developed fierce loyalty to the big cam. It became more than an engine. It became an identity. Drivers would specify a big cam when ordering a new truck and pay extra if necessary. Used trucks with big cams commanded premium prices. The engine's distinctive loping idle, a syncopated rhythm caused by slight variations in cylinder balance, became a sound truckers recognized instantly. Pull into a truck stop and you could identify the big cams by sound alone. That loyalty would make what happened next even more painful. Every mechanical engine has a weakness, and for the big cam, it was the injectors. Cummins used a top-stop injector design where fuel delivery was controlled by mechanical linkage. Over time, carbon buildup and wear would change injection timing, reducing power and increasing smoke. The fix required removing the injectors and servicing them, a time-consuming job. But the injector issue was minor compared to what Detroit Diesel was about to face. Detroit Diesel's two-stroke design, brilliant in the 1940s, had become a liability by the 1980s. The engines required more frequent maintenance than four-stroke competitors. The supercharger bearings wore, the cylinder liners wore. And the blowers required regular rebuilding, and fuel economy, always Detroit's weakness, became critical as fuel prices spiked. Four-stroke engines from Cummins, Caterpillar, and Mack were delivering 20% better fuel economy than comparable Detroit two-strokes. For long-haul truckers, that gap was enormous. The Series 71 and its successor, the Series 92, were losing market share. Detroit Diesel's response was revolutionary. In 1987, they introduced the Series 60, the first heavy-duty diesel engine with full electronic control. No mechanical governor, no mechanical fuel injection. everything controlled by computer. The electronic control module monitored engine speed, load, temperature, boost pressure, and throttle position hundreds of times per second. It adjusted fuel injection timing and duration in real time. The result was an engine that delivered better fuel economy than any mechanical diesel, more power, lower emissions, and diagnostic capabilities that made troubleshooting almost trivial. The Series 60 was a gamble. Truckers were deeply conservative. They trusted mechanical simplicity. Electronics seemed like a vulnerability. The gamble paid off. The Series 60 became one of the most successful engines in trucking history. It was efficient, powerful, reliable, and crucially, it met increasingly strict EPA emissions requirements without sacrificing performance. Cummins scrambled to respond. Their answer was the N14, introduced in 1988. The N14 was a mechanical masterpiece, an evolution of the Big Cam design with electronic controls grafted on. It produced up to 525 horsepower and remained fully mechanical, except for the electronically controlled fuel system. Truckers loved it. The N14 combined Big Cam toughness with modern power. It was the last great mechanical diesel. But the EPA was about to kill mechanical engines entirely. Federal emissions standards tightened throughout the 1990s. By 1998, new regulations required such precise control of combustion that mechanical fuel injection couldn't meet the standards. Every engine manufacturer went fully electronic. Cummins replaced the N14 with the ISX in 1998. The ISX was a clean sheet design, fully electronic, built specifically for the emissions era. It was powerful, efficient, and reliable. It was also, by the standards of old-school truckers, soulless. The early ISX engines earned a nickname truckers still remember, the green leaker. In the first production years, head gaskets failed prematurely. Coolant leaked into cylinders. Coolant leaked onto the ground. The distinctive green-tinted coolant Cummins used created puddles under trucks at every truck stop in America. Cummins issued a recall and redesigned the head gasket, but the damage to their reputation was done. Truckers who had trusted Cummins for decades suddenly questioned everything. Detroit Diesel capitalized, positioning the Series 60 as the reliable choice against Cummins' troubled new engine. The green leaker crisis handed Detroit market share Cummins took years to win back. Then came 2007. The EPA mandated diesel particulate filters, DPF systems that trapped soot from exhaust. Like the regulation required that particulate matter emissions drop by 90% compared to 2006 levels. Every manufacturer scrambled to comply. The DPF was essentially a honeycomb ceramic filter placed in the exhaust stream. As exhaust passed through, soot particles stuck to the filter walls. Over time, the filter loaded up with soot. When back pressure reached a threshold, the engine computer would initiate a regeneration cycle, injecting extra fuel to superheat the exhaust, burning off the accumulated soot. During regeneration, fuel economy dropped by 10% or more. Engine power was sometimes limited. The process could take 20 minutes or longer, depending on driving conditions. 3 years later, 2010 brought the second wave, diesel exhaust fluid systems. DEF is a urea-based solution, 32.5% urea, 67.5% deionized water. The system injects DEF into the exhaust stream ahead of a catalytic converter. The heat breaks down the urea into ammonia, which reacts with nitrogen oxides to form harmless nitrogen and water vapor. The chemistry works. NOx emissions dropped by 90%. But the implementation meant truckers now had to maintain a second fluid tank. DEF freezes at 12 degrees Fahrenheit, so the tank required heating elements in cold weather. The fluid degrades if stored too long. Use contaminated DEF, and the catalyst fails, a $5,000 repair. If the DEF tank runs dry, engine power derates to 5 miles per hour after shutdown. The system is designed to force compliance. You keep the DEF tank full or you don't drive. Truckers revolted, not against Cummins or Detroit, against the EPA. Forums filled with rage about government overreach. Much about reliable engines being ruined by emissions equipment, about the loss of power and efficiency, about being treated like children who couldn't be trusted to maintain their own trucks. Delete kits appeared on the market, aftermarket software and hardware to disable DPF and DEF systems. The EPA responded with massive fines for shops performing deletes and drivers running deleted trucks. The cat-and-mouse game continues today. The emotional reaction was about control as much as mechanics. Truckers felt that something fundamental had been taken from them without their consent. The simplicity, the reliability, the right to work on their own equipment. The truth was more nuanced than the anger suggested. Modern engines with DPF and DEF systems actually produce more power than pre-2007 engines, often 50 to 100 horsepower more. Fuel economy. Now, once the after-treatment systems were properly maintained, was equal to or better than older engines. Reliability, after the first few years of teething problems, was excellent. But the emotional reality was different. These systems added complexity. They added maintenance requirements. They added failure points that couldn't be fixed roadside with basic tools. And they fundamentally changed the relationship between driver and machine. Pre-2007 engines were mechanical systems a competent driver could understand and maintain. Post-2010 engines were electronic systems that required diagnostic software and dealer support. The character, the feeling of control, the sense of partnership, all of it eroded. If stories like this move you, if you remember when engines had personality and trucking was different, consider subscribing. Now we explore the machines and the history that shaped American industry. Detroit Diesel went through upheaval of its own. In 1988, Roger Penske bought Detroit Diesel from General Motors. The purchase saved the company. Under GM ownership, Detroit Diesel had been starved of investment. Penske poured money into development, modernizing manufacturing, and expanding the Series 60 lineup. Then, in 2006, Penske sold Detroit Diesel to Daimler. Suddenly, Detroit Diesel was part of the same corporate family as Freightliner and Western Star trucks. The circle closed. Detroit had gone from GM's captive division to independent company back to captive division, now serving Daimler instead of GM. Today, Cummins dominates heavy-duty engines in North America with roughly 60% market share. Detroit, owned by Daimler, Ochi dominates Freightliner, the best-selling truck brand in America. PACCAR trucks run PACCAR-branded engines, which are actually rebranded Cummins and DAF designs. Caterpillar exited the on-highway market entirely in 2009. Mack builds their own engines, but the real battle remains Cummins versus Detroit. And yet, walk through any truck stop and you'll hear drivers argue the old debates. Cummins guys swear by durability and fuel economy. Detroit guys swear by power delivery and dealer support. Neither will admit the other makes a decent engine. The tribal loyalty persists even though modern engines from both manufacturers are remarkably similar: electronic, efficient, powerful, reliable, and burdened with emissions equipment both companies would rather not include. The nostalgia is real. Now, veteran truckers remember when you could hear an engine and know exactly what it was. A screaming Jimmy announced itself a mile away. A Big Cam had a distinctive lope at idle. An N14 sounded angry under load. Modern engines sound like appliances. They're better in every measurable way, more powerful, more efficient, cleaner, more reliable. They're also boring. The character is gone, replaced by precision and compliance. What remains is the competition itself. Cummins and Detroit have been fighting for the same customers for 85 years. The weapons have changed. Horsepower gave way to fuel economy, which gave way to emissions compliance, which gave way to electronic integration with truck systems. But the battle continues. Every model year brings new engines with slightly more power, slightly better fuel economy, slightly lower emissions. One of the engineering has advanced to levels Plessy Cummins and the Detroit Diesel founders couldn't have imagined. But the core mission remains the same: build the engine truckers want to run. The 100-year war that powered every truck in America isn't over. It's just moved from the garage and the factory floor to the software and the sensors. The engines are smarter, cleaner, and more capable than ever before. But talk to any driver who remembers the sound of a screaming Jimmy winding through the gears or the unstoppable torque of a Big Cam pulling a grade, and you'll understand what was lost in the name of progress. Those engines weren't just machines, they were partners. They had voices. They demanded respect and gave loyalty in return. Modern engines are better tools, but tools don't have souls. And maybe that's the real story of Cummins versus Detroit. It's not about which company won, it's about what we gave up to meet the future. The engines got better, the experience got worse. Progress demanded efficiency and compliance. We got both. What we lost was the feeling that the machine under the hood was alive.